Welcome to the Embodied Faith podcast. Today we're talking about or asking what is self-compassion? How is that different than self-esteem and why is it important? As always, my name is Geoff Holsclaw and I'm joined today also by Cyd Holsclaw. And this is the Embodied Faith podcast that is seeking to integrate neuroscience, spirituality, and faith. And as always, we are brought to you by Grassroots Christianity, which is growing faith for everyday people. All right. So today we are introducing a new segment or new kind of episode, which is a reflection episode. And I'm bringing on Cyd here to join us. Hey, Cyd, welcome to our first inaugural episode of Embodied Faith Reflections.
Yes, it is great to be here. We've talked about this a lot. I'm glad we're finally doing it.
Yes. And this is kind of an episode format where you and I are just going to be talking about different things that we find interesting or big ideas that we think are important as well, which is different than other episodes where we interview people. And then you're actually going to be starting to do some practice episodes where we're just going to actually embody the faith and the things that we're talking about. So today we're talking about self-compassion. I'm going to hand it off to you.
Yeah, so this is something I've been thinking about a lot lately because it's been really powerful in my own journey of spiritual formation. And I just see it coming up so often with the clients that I work with when I'm doing coaching and spiritual direction. There are just so many people, and especially ministry leaders. It seems to really plague ministry leaders of this sense of I can have so much compassion for other people, but somehow that compassion doesn't apply to me. So, just as an example, I was just on a call with someone this morning, and I want to talk later about how this shifted for him. But as we were talking, he was just really being honest about how this situation feels so frustrating. And he was frustrated with himself that he was having such a hard time sort of letting go of the desire to control or to fix or to try to make something happen. And was just, and this is just sort of an indicator that I've heard so many times from other ministry leaders too, just that frustration with yourself or that sort of sense of like, I should be better at this, or I should be more mature than this, or I should be more Christian than this. My faith should be stronger than this. And so that just sort of heaping that sort of shame or that being so hard on ourselves. And I have a cat in my background, but that happens often for ministry leaders. And so it's just something that I've just been thinking about a lot lately because I find that in those sessions with me, with my clients, more and more often, we're really shifting towards trying to exercise self-compassion as a way of being able to receive compassion from God as well.
Yeah. And that is, it's not true just for ministry leaders, but just kind of all people on their walk of
Yeah,
faith,
everybody. I
right?
didn't mean to limit
Yeah,
it.
yeah.
It just
As
it
they
seems
struggle with,
especially
like,
pernicious.
feelings of shame and things like that. So, sure.
Yeah.
So, oftentimes, and I'm gonna jump ahead in our little notes there, but oftentimes the answer, and if any of you who are watching live, feel free to give comments or thumbs up about different things. But oftentimes, and this is the way I was raised, is in a culture of self-esteem, is that the way to cure this kind of self-hatred or just kind of ruminating and all the dumb things you did over your life is to actually believe that you're important, that you're special, learn how to love yourself. Maybe like the clinical or kind of psychological definition of self-esteem is something like feeling competent in life and feeling that others see you similarly, right? So gathering these kind of competencies, but then also downplaying kind of your deficiencies or downplaying the places that have gone wrong in your life, or oftentimes blaming others. Right. So there's a self esteem kind of culture that kind of links in with blaming others. And so this has been a popular kind of movement within psychology, but as well as our culture. And so oftentimes that's kind of how we're taught to respond. But there might be a different or a better way, which is this way of self-compassion.
Well, I think first of all, even just hearing you describe self-esteem, I think, there's a lot of resistance just based on sort of how we understand life with God, and that sense of like, well, I can't just feel good about myself because I'm broken, and I have all these places of sin in my life, and so just feeling good about myself doesn't feel like the answer, because how can I feel good about the fact that I'm so broken?
Right. And then people feel like, well, I have to either choose between believing or understanding my like a doctrine of sin, or I have to kind of, take this kind of therapeutic advice and downplay sin. And then it just creates all these different problems, which is not great.
Yeah.
So I'm handing it back to you.
Oh, okay. All right. So compassion. First of all, I just even just knowing what we know about our nervous systems and about our bodies and the way that they function, part of the reason that self-compassion feels so crucial is because when we don't have compassion for ourselves, when we're sort of resisting ourselves or considering ourselves our own worst enemy. Like, for example, I used to classically say, and Geoff would kind of tease me about it, but throughout the early years of
Mm.
our marriage, it was like I would lose my keys, or I would lose something or my water glass or my cup of coffee. And I would walk all over the apartment or later the house and just go, why am I always losing things? I drive myself crazy. And just that sense of like, I drive myself crazy. I am my enemy. I am against myself. And that sort of tension that we sometimes feel with ourselves of like, good grief, like, why do I do these things? Actually raises the threat level response in our autonomic nervous system. And so our nervous system is sort of hearing this self talk in our heads of like, what is wrong with me? Or I drive myself nuts. And that actually, whether we're aware of it or not, causes this response in our bodies, this physiological response of I'm under threat, like I'm being attacked or I'm being criticized. And who's doing that attacking or criticizing? Me. Like I'm doing it to myself. And so that just makes it harder to change or to do anything if we're just attacking ourselves in the process.
So that's like where you're, and maybe traumatizing is too strong of a word, but we're triggering ourselves, we're self-traumatizing, we're creating a negative spiral where we're following our on and on nervous system is kind of collapsing along with us, and our thoughts and our bodies are all kind of going the wrong direction.
Yeah, and we think we're being helpful. There's actually probably, there's like parts of us that earlier in our lives have been criticized in that same way, or maybe or we have this sense that if I criticize myself, and we don't do this consciously, but if I criticize myself, then I can beat somebody else to the punch. Like if I've already criticized myself, then it won't hurt so bad when somebody else criticizes me.
Mm, mm.
And that's sort of
Raise
like,
your hand
well,
if anyone does that, right? Let's criticize ourselves so that we know, and then we signal to everyone else, I know I suck, so I'm going to bring it up first, right? And it's just like,
yeah,
falls. Yeah. So that's,
yeah, you can't tell me anything I don't already know about
yikes.
myself.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So the counter to that, that negative spiral would be something that you learned that this psychologist, Kristen Neff, has been describing as um, self compassion. And so she starts off with a definition of compassion, which is compassion involves being touched by the suffering of others and opening one's awareness to the pain of others and not avoiding or disconnecting from it. So that's something we could probably all grow in, is being learning to be touched by the suffering of others and not avoiding or disconnecting from it. And then she says, and what we need to do is have self compassion, which is learning how to be open to one's own suffering, and then giving kindness toward yourself. And the second part is also understanding that there's like an experience of common humanity in the midst of suffering. So there's kind of these two sides to it, of being kind to yourself and connecting your experience as something that's common, which kind of goes against the self-esteem, which is you're all unique, you're all special, be yourself. And part of self-compassion is like, well, actually, this is kind of the common lot of humanity. Okay. So that's some of these big kind of things. So what do you think, or do you have any comments about Sid, about these two things about being kind and the common experience of humanity?
Well, I mean, about the common experience of humanity, I just know that, I mean, for so many of my clients, when I am able to sort of normalize, like, yeah, the thing that you're feeling, you're not the only one. Like, you're not alone in that. Just knowing that, I think, in that sense of this isn't I'm not alone in having this experience. Other people struggle with the same thing, or other people have felt the same thing. Like, that's always it always brings, like, a sigh of relief for people to be like, "Oh, you mean I'm not as crazy and confused and broken as I thought I was? Like, other people are there with me?" So that common experience of humanity can be really powerful. And then the kindness is just we all know the difference of being treated kindly and being treated with, rudeness or criticism or harshness. And we all know the difference of what that feels like. We'd much rather be treated kindly than be treated harshly. And yet we're so often harsh with ourselves rather than kind. And again, that kindness can just sort of soften that threat level response as well. Yeah. And I think the thing that's confusing though, I think, is like, where do you find the entry point into compassion? So as you've been listening already to this, if you're like, yeah, that's me. I'm pretty harsh. I have a hard time being kind to myself. I don't really know how to give myself compassion. There's been, two ways that I think that have been really helpful for me and have also been really helpful for the people that I coach is that, one way is thinking about the last time I felt compassion for someone else, and just noticing, like, last time I was listening to somebody and I was sort of feeling with them and feeling kindness toward them and feeling like a leaning in and almost a desire to be able to help. Like, if there was something I could do to alleviate your suffering, I would. And just sort of feeling that and noticing what that feels like. And then saying, that is just a hint, just a shadow of what God feels for me. That as I'm in a place of difficulty, or as I'm on a place of pain or struggle, or even just frustration or suffering, like, as I listen to people who are in that place, I feel compassion for them. And that compassion that I feel for them is just a tiny glimmer of the compassion that God has for me. And so if I can sort of tune into that, that's a way to enter into receiving compassion from God. And then the other way to enter into that is just, reminding that, well, if God has compassion for me, and if other people have compassion for me, what is it like for me to feel compassion for myself? And the thing that's great about is that you get the double benefit of, like, extending compassion is actually really good for your brain. It's good for your nervous system to extend compassion towards someone else. And then also, it's really good for us to be able to receive compassion, receive attunement. And so when we're both extending compassion toward ourselves and receiving compassion for ourselves, we're getting the double benefit of both sides.
Mm.
And that, I mean, God wants to meet us exactly where we are. Like, Jesus doesn't go around meeting people and saying, you should do better. You're terrible. You should do better. What's wrong with you? Jesus doesn't do that. Instead, he meets people right where they are, sees them where they are, and, has a tenderness and a compassion toward them. And so when we can receive that kind of compassion and offer that compassion for ourselves, I think we're closer to understanding God's heart for us and being
Mm.
able to receive his tenderness and kindness.
Yeah, and we're called to love God and love others as we love ourselves. And kind of in the self-esteem movement or kind of perspective, that loving yourself is kind of like affirming yourself or believing the best in yourself and all these different kinds of things. And that's kind of like a weird, it seems like it's a good way, but it actually is kind of a weird way to think of love. But when with this idea of self-compassion, that idea of loving God and loving others as you love yourself, it's like, well, having compassion for others as you have compassion for yourself kind of opens up that space for what love might look like for one another, that is less shame filled, less achievement oriented. Um, yeah. So, and maybe this leads into the practice you're going to offer in the next short episode. But sometimes we think that um, if I can grow in giving myself compassion, if I can grow in self compassion, then I'll be able to receive compassion from God more. I'll be able to believe that God loves me. But it actually probably works the other way around, right? Is that as we grow in sensing and remembering and feeling that Jesus has compassion for us in our weakness, then we can grow in self-compassion, because we know neurologically that we're social beings. And so the things we learn usually come from outside and then go inside, rather than us changing something inside and then it affects us outside. And Paul talks about this, when he talks about sin, he doesn't just say, and I think a lot of times the people who struggle so much with self-compassion, they come from this certain kind of Calvinist Reformed tradition, which is sin is overt conscious rebellion against God. Like, I was an enemy of God, and yet um, God loved me, or something like that. But Paul also talks about weakness, is that when we were still weak, God came to us with love. And I think that weakness, and remembering that God meets us in our own weakness, is really important. Not just that, like, oh, you're a terrible sinner because you rebel and you consciously are, have it in and you want to be God instead. And well, maybe sometimes, but other times I'm just weak and stupid. Like, I don't know.
Yeah, I think I know I struggled with that. I used to live in that realm of there is nothing good that can ever come out of me, and every thought that I ever have and every impulse and instinct that I ever have is all evil because of total depravity. And I yeah, I don't want to go too much into that, but just that what the real turning point for me, was a prayer experience that I had, where I remembered a moment where everybody around me was upset with me and angry with me, and saying harsh words and sort of like, "Ugh, what were you thinking? Like, this is so ridiculous." Like, and there was a lot of harshness in that. And then in this prayer experience, Jesus kind of stepped right in front of all of that and just was able to offer, like, wow, for the age you were at, that was such an intelligent choice that you made. Like, you were doing the best you possibly could at this age. Like, that was really wise for your little 4-year-old self. And receiving that kind of kindness and compassion sort of made me shift everything that I had thought about how Jesus comes to us in weakness, rather than the sinners in the hands of the angry God kind of sense, but instead that the compassion for weakness, the compassion for the brokenness, and the compassion for you think this is good for you, but it's really not. And I can do something better. I can do something so much more for you. And that's where I started learning the compassion of God. And so I think, as far as like having to learn compassion from God first, I think that probably really depends on what your view of God is and whether you're even able to comprehend a God who would be compassionate towards you. So sometimes maybe it does need to start with self compassion and sort of thinking of the way that, like, if everybody else around me is worthy of compassion, then what makes me so different that I'm not worthy of compassion? Right? That doesn't
Mhm.
make any logical, rational sense. So if everyone around me, if I can have compassion for the people around me, then I can also have compassion for myself. And if my God image doesn't have room for compassion right now, maybe that's where I need to start. And then after showing myself compassion and trying to learn that I deserve compassion just like everyone else in my life, then maybe after that for a little while, then maybe there begins to be, maybe God is also compassionate. But I know I learned it by receiving God's compassion first. And then if
Right.
God has compassion for me, then I can probably learn to try to be compassionate toward myself.
Excellent. Well, in the next short episode, so Sid is a coach, but also a spiritual director and trained in spiritual formation, and regularly offers like practices and um, to her clients. And so you're going to be kind of walking us through a self compassion practice in the next episode. And then I think we have scheduled another question, which is about self acceptance. So I don't know if you are ready to tease that for the future, or if I'll just kind of throw that out there right now.
Yeah, I think just, like, there's a lot about self-acceptance out in the world, right? There's like all like Buddhist meditation and, all kinds of stuff is like you just, be you, you be you, accept yourself as you are. And so I think that, as believers and in the church, I think sometimes we can resist that and be allergic to that, of just like, oh, like that's
Die
not
to yourself, take up your cross and follow
right,
me.
right, but there is something really powerful that happens when we're able to align ourselves with reality. Like, this is the
Mm.
reality that I live in right now. This just is, And as long as I keep resisting or fighting against what is, again, that's that threat level response that happens in our bodies. And so when we can, the only place that we can really be is in the here and now, in the reality that
All right, well, don't
exists.
give the whole show
Okay, well,
away.
anyway,
Just a
that's what we
tease. I gotta so Sid will be joining us. She's gonna be joining the Embodied Faith podcast regularly. So we're really excited about that. Joining with the interviews as well as these reflections and practices. But I still have to train her in the art of the tease of the next episode. So thank
Well,
you
we
for
need to
every
and we need to work on, like, the it's really weird to not be in the same room. I feel like I'm still talking to you, but it'd be different when we're having a conversation together.
I
So we'll
know.
make it more conversational over time too.
And we might figure out the equipment and figure out a way to be in the same room. So, but for all of you listening and watching, you can please like and subscribe these videos on YouTube if you're watching there, as well as you can find the Embodied Faith podcast anywhere that you get podcasts, iTunes, Spotify, Google, all the other places. So please do that and share this around. We would really appreciate it. And well, we will be talking to all of you soon.